Meeting a Stranger, Sharon Olds, 2013. When I meet you, it's not just the two of us meeting. Your mother is there, and your father is there, and my mother and father, and our people back from our folks back are there, and what they might have had to do with each other if one of yours and one of mine had met, what might have happened, is there in the room with us. They are shadowy compared to us. They are quivers of reflected light on a wall. And if I were a German and you a Jew, or I a Jew and you a Palestinian, or as this morning, when you are an African-American woman and I am a WASP, one of your family might have been taken from their home and brought through murder to murder by one of my family. It is there in the air with us. And if you're a woman in the city where you live, and I'm staying at the hotel where you work, and if you have brought me my breakfast on a tray, though you and I have not met before, we are breathing in each other's lineages together. And whether there's guilt in the room or not, or blame, there is the history of human evil and the shame in me that someone I could be related to could have committed against someone you are related to, some horror. And in the room, there is a question alive. Would I have risked harm to try to protect you, as I hope I would risk it for a cousin, a niece? Or would I have stood aside in the ordinary cowardice and self-interest of my flesh, now sharing your breath, your flesh, my breath? Thank you.
Scribe by Paul Auster from White Spaces, 1972. The name never left his lips. He talked himself into another body. He found his room again in Babel. It was written, a flower falls from his eye and blooms in a stranger's mouth. A swallow rhymes with hunger and cannot leave its egg. He invents the orphan in tatters. He will hold a small black flag riddled with winter. It is spring, and below his window he hears 100 white stones turn to raging flocks.
The Veil, Denis Johnson, 1980. When the tide lay under the clouds on an afternoon and gave them back to themselves, oilier a little and filled with anonymous boats, I used to sit and drink at the very edge of it, where light passed through the liquids in the glasses and threw itself on the white drapes of the tables, resting there like clarity itself, you might think, right where you could put a hand to it. As drink gave way to drink, the slow, unfathomable voices of luncheon made a window of ultraviolet light in the mind, through which one at last saw the skeleton of everything, stripped of any sense or consequence, freed of geography and absolutely devoid of charm, And in this originating brightness, you might see somebody putting a napkin against his lips, or placing a blazing credit card on a plastic tray, and you'd know. You would know, goddammit, and never be able to say. The Guild, Sharon Olds, October 1978. Every night as my grandfather sat in the darkened room in front of the fire, the bourbon-like fire in his hand, his eye glittering meaningless in the light from the flames, his glass eye baleful and stony, a young man sat with him in silence and darkness, a college boy with white skin, unlined, a narrow, beautiful face, a broad domed forehead, and eyes amber as the resin from trees too young to be cut yet. This was his son who sat, an apprentice, night after night, his glass of coals next to the old man's glass of coals. And he drank when the old man drank, and he learned the craft of oblivion. That the young man, not yet cruel, his hair dark as the soil that feeds the tree's roots, that son who would come to be in his turn, better at this than the teacher, the apprentice who would pass his master in cruelty and oblivion, drinking steadily by the flames in the blackness, that young man, my father.
The throne of the third heaven of the nation's Millennium General Assembly. Denis Johnson, 1969. James Hampton, 1909. Ellery, South Carolina, 1964. Washington, D.C. Custodian, General Services Administration. Maker of the throne. 1. I dreamed I had been dreaming, and sadness did descend. And when from the first dreaming I woke, I walked behind. The window crossed with smoke and rain in Washington, D.C., the neighbors strangling newspapers or watching the TV. Down on the rug in undershirts like bankrupt criminals, the street where revelation made James Hampton miserable lay wet beyond glass, and on it moved street corner men in a stream of crossed out clues and pompadours and voodoo and sweet Jesus made of ivory. And when I woke, the headlines shone out on Ellery: 2 endless roads, 4 endless fields. And when I woke, the veils of rain fell down around a sign: Fry and Saturday jam with the man, Monster Man, and 2. Nobody in Ellery, South Carolina, stop and go. Nobody in the Sunoco or in all of Ellery, his birthplace. His name, But right outside runs Hampton Street, called probably for the owners of his family. God, are you there, or have I been long on these highways? And I've seen Miami, Treasure Coast, Space Coast. I have seen where the astronauts burned. I have looked where the Father placed the pale orange churches in the sun, have passed through Georgia in its green eternity of leaves unturned, but nothing like Ellery. 2. Sam and I drove up from Key West, Florida, visited James Hampton's birthplace in South Carolina, saw the throne at the National Museum of American Art in Washington. It was a big room. I couldn't take it all in, and I was a little frightened and left and came back home to Massachusetts. I'm glad the throne exists. My days are better for it, and I feel something that makes me know that my life is real, to think he died unknown and without a friend, as I looked at and was looked at by the rushing together parts of this vision of someone who is probably insane, growing brighter and brighter like a forest after the rain. And if you look at the leaves of a forest as its dirt and its heights, the shuddering mystic replication, the blithering symmetry, you'll go crazy too. If you look at the city and its spilled wine and broke glass, its spilled and broken peoples and hearts, you'll go crazy. If you stand in the world, you'll go out of your mind. But it's all right. What happened to him can now, anyway, now that he doesn't have to, accept it. I don't believe that Christ, when he claimed the last, will be the first, the lost life saved. When he implied that the deeply abysmal is deeply blessed, I just can't believe that Christ, when faced with poor, poor people, aspiring to become at best the wives and husbands of a lonely fear, would have spoken redundantly. Surely he couldn't have referred to some other time or place, when in fact such a place and time are unnecessary. We have a time and a place here, now abundantly. 3. He waits forever in front of diagrams on a blackboard in one of his photographs, labels that make no sense attached to the radiant, alien things he sketched, which aren't objects but plans of his last dated vision, stated. This design is proof of the Virgin Mary descending into heaven. The street corner men, the shaking earthlings, it's easy to imagine his hands when looking at their hands of leather, loving on the necks of jugs, sweetly touching the dice and bad checks, and see in everything a making just like his, an unhinged deity in an empty garage, dying alone in some small consolation. Photograph me, photograph me, photograph me in my suit of loneliness, my tie, which I have been saving for the occasion, my shoes of dust, my skin of pollen, addressing the empty chair behind me, the throne of the third heaven of the nation's Millennium General Assembly. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. The trash of government buildings, faded red cloth, jelly glasses and light bulbs, metal cut from coffee cans, upholstery tacks, small nails, and simple sewing pins, light bulbs, cardboards, craft paper, desk blotters, gold and aluminum foils. Neighborhood bums the foil on their wine bottles. The revelation, I command you not to fear.
Poem which talks back to itself. Sharon Olds, 1980. For Eaton Potts. The parents whose boys went off to school that morning. The police may have found someone who saw their son alive after they saw him for the last time. Step away. Someone who saw that elfin face change at the word soda. Step back and change again and change. And down the basement steps, down into the earth, the stairs down into the underworld. Don't go there. Close your eyes. Someone may know the unbearable, someone in custody. Oh, custody. A wall of dirt, a wall of stone, a bare bulb like the uterus upside down. No Kaddish, no washing of the dead, no linen shroud, no company through the long night. Whatever honor can be kept for him, his pure and whole honor is kept by his parents for the rest of the hard labor of their lives. All this time, they could not die, so they'd be here in case he came back. Unspeakable. And now, the one taken in for questioning cries out, I don't know why, I don't know why. He will not tell. He is holding that hour to himself. Did he hold that child in his hands 39 years ago? Vanished. The spirit mattered away, and the dear matter don't. The bag, the truck, the landfill or the barge, the burial at sea, the dispersal, the containment within the bounds of the oceans, crested on top and cragged at the floor where the innards of the planet pour up, molten through fissures, contained in the air, bound by the atmosphere, the clouds of morning pressing against the inner surface of the casing. Shut your mouth, put down your pen, drop your weapon, stop. In the name of the law and the prophets. At his birth, the history of the earth began. Anatomy Lesser for the Officer, Sharon Olds, from Ballads, 2023. That is your head. That is your heart. Elbow, bicep, knee, thigh. And the valve in the back of you, your behind, I think it may be a genital part which holds your genital part from in front. I am not saying go F yourself. You have done that. You have F'd our species. I am saying that is your holster, your gun, your handcuffs. And those are your hands in your cuffs. And then as a human throat you are kneeling on. That is our throat, our brothers, our sons, maybe our father's throat. That is your mother's, your father's, your son's, your daughter's throat. That is your daughter's throat.
Spokes, Paul Auster, March 1972. Roots writhe with the worm, the sift of the clock cohabits the sparrow's heart. Between branch and spire, the word belittles its nest, and the seed, rocked by simpler confines, will not confess. Only the egg gravitates. In water, my absence in aridity, a flower that defines the air. In the deepest well, your body is a fuse. The bark is not enough. It furls redundant shards, will barter rock for sap, blood for veering sluice, while the leaf is pecked, brindled with air, and how much more, furrowed or wrapped, between dog and wolf, how much longer will it stake the axe to its gloating advantage? Nothing waters the bowl, the stone wastes nothing. Speech could not cobble the swamp, and so you dance for a brighter silence. Light severs wave, sinks, camouflages. I name you desert. Picks jot the quarry, eroded marks that could not cipher the message. The quarrel unleashed its alphabet, and the stones, girded by abuse, have memorized the defeat. Drunk, whiteness hoards its strength. When you sleep, sun-drunk like a seed that holds its breath beneath the soil. To dream in heat, all heat that infests the equilibrium of a hand that germinates. The miracle of defeat. In each place you have left, wolves are maddened by the leaves that will not speak. To die, to welcome red wolves scratching at the gates, howling page, or you sleep and the sun will never be finished. It is green where black seeds breathe. The flower is red, is perched when roots split in the gnarl of a tower, sucking in its meager fast and retracting the spell that welds step to word and ties the tongue to its faults. The flower will be red when the first word tears the book, will thrive in the ooze, take color of a lesioned beak, when the sparrow is bloodied and flies from one earth into the bell. Between the sparrow and the bird without name, its prey. God escapes through the interval into the hub the shell implodes, persists in a pun of loam and rock, rising as stick to invade, to drive out the babble that worded its body, to emerge, to wait for future blows, city in root, indeed, unsprung, even out of the city. Get out, the wheel was deception, it cannot turn. Smoke that softens coals, unlike the sect of wings where you beat, smoke wed to glow, in the sparrow's memory it perfects the sleep of clouds. The egg limits renunciation, cannot sound in another's ringing. The least hammering before the whale slits its course and the eye squanders the subterfuge of a longer lamp. Lifted into speech, it carries its own birth, and if it shatters, acclaim its fall and contradiction. Your earth will always be far.
Mathematical love poem with a proof. Sharon Olds, 2023. I am on the plane, in the air, before I see what just happened. I fell in love with him, again, in the car to the airport. It happened sentence by sentence, slowly, like pickup sticks. As a child, I would lay one atop a precarious nest of its fellows and then another. With Carl, you don't know when he's going to feel insulted and get mad at you, but now I had said, the math in graduate school, was it real or theoretical? What do you mean? Well, 2 apples plus 2 apples is 4. It was all theory, he said, but it had to be proved true, to be used for things like physics. And for the first time, he tells me about his prelims and the summer before them. It's a different world, he said. I dreamed numbers. And when was that, I asked, in relation to your buying the farmland with your uncle? Gradually, we moved through time and space. And your uncle's death? Quiet, but not hesitant. We passed something. Not a planet, a hill. 6 years. And he is willing to fill me in without that impatience, as if I should have known. He drives over a river past piles of autumn brush like wood rat nests of pickup sticks. Sticks that at the speed of light would be measurably longer. I love the way his palms face backwards when he walks with that cattleman walk and the curls at his nape, black and silver shot. I love his thick neck and the way his 3 o'clock shadow can't be told from the dirt he has been working in. When he looks at the stone ledge, which has been bearing in memory of his brother over months, I feel as if his mind is making some kind of earthen love with it. I see him in my sleep embracing it, throwing it up onto his back. A song made of numbers. He carries it, and I dance with him as if born to it. And I was born to it. That concludes the selection of poetry for this poetry read-in. I would like to open it up. We did for our first verse, we opened it up at the end for a discussion to kind of share any reflections that you may have had, any questions that you wanted to discuss as a group, and anything thereof. So I'm going to take this out of its holster and come to you guys if you have anything that you would like to share. Anyone? Yeah, Star.
I just want to say it's so wonderful to just hear poetry for itself spoken. And it was a great experience for me. I haven't been to a reading like this where various people come up and read various poems, and nobody is an identity. The poetry is the identity, and it brings the poetry much closer to you than a book or a reading by a poet. It's kind of a wonderful way of presenting poetry, so that's what I want.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Thank you for coming, and thank you for saying such kind words. Anybody else like to share anything? Yeah, sure. Roswell, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Star said. I think also not seeing the poem before you read it adds to it as well. There's like a freshness, and so I think your strategy is good.
I'm just saying the same thing, but yeah, the format is really wonderful. Not seeing the poem before, very fresh and in the presence. Thank you so much. I enjoyed being part of this and listening to the others.
Yeah. Coming. One of the things, just to raise to that, the beauty of going into it blind does create an organic experience. Everything that you do, even if there's somebody, and forgive me, I'm blanking on the person, but they would say, like, sometimes when you're reading something out loud, or even a typo, sometimes those things, like if you make the mistakes, that's a once-in-a-lifetime moment. That can't be recreated when you publish a book or anything. That what we just experienced is, even if you watch it back on playing, this is a once-in-a-lifetime moment, which is, I guess, how I don't know, it's very philosophical. Maybe I'm leaning it's too philosophical at the moment. Sorry.
And I also really loved how you picked poems from different time periods. There were ones that were before I was born. There were ones where I was wondering what was going on in that year, that could have influenced that poet. So it was really thoughtful and wonderful.
So just a little tidbit about the poems themselves. Some of the Denis Johnson poems were chosen because of these emails that Sherry, our executive director, had shared with me between her and Sam Messer as they were putting together Some Odes. And there was a lot of nostalgia for, what they had experienced. If you guys haven't taken in the Some Odes exhibition, please do so. It is a beautiful story, and Sam Messer is kind of, when I talk to people who know him, he's like the quintessential person that brings people together. And everything is kind of an act of community with him. And so reading his kind of reflections on some of these poems led to the inclusion of the Denis Johnson poems, as well as some of the Paul Auster poems. And then also, since it's called Some Odes, odes tend to be like song. And there's a quote, which I'm sure, since you guys all bought tickets for here, that you read when it was on the website, by Sharon Olds when I was writing the press release, that I felt really fitting. And it was about that we're all looking, if you will humor me, I will pull it up and just read it real quick. Because I do not have a photographic memory, unfortunately. Sometimes. But it was this idea, and now my phone doesn't want to load it. But it was this idea of that, poems are like birds, and birds sing to each other, and that we are singing to each other. And so that's what an ode is. An ode is, a song, and it follows a certain theme. And so I knew that we wanted to start with Meeting a Stranger. It is in our show in the back corner, and it plays with line breaks, and it changed. If you look at the original publication, there is no line breaks, these gaps, the way that they are. And it was her collaboration with Sam Messer that, in this discussion of oceans, that kind of developed that. And one of the things that I knew that I was going to start with the Meeting a Stranger, but what I started to find with all of them was this sort of running theme of the stranger, but the stranger not being separate. So even though Meet the Stranger, there is this contemplation of separation, it's still having enough, I guess for lack of a better term, compassion or human empathy for the other, so that you don't actually see it as separate. And what a beautiful symbol if you have these giant gaps between the lines, and yet it's still one cohesive poem. It's still one line, even though there's a gap in it. And I don't want to get too nerdy up here, but if you're really into like form, I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to poetic form, and it's really interesting. I do recommend taking one of the booklets with you on your way out and just look at the difference at how all of the poets use line breaks. Sharon's use of line breaks is very, very different than Denis and very different than Paul's. Some of it is metered, some of it is also to draw particular attention to words at the end. And so it's just really, really beautiful, but I'm yammering, and forgive me. I just wanted to say that there is such beauty between these three poets when it comes to human empathy that I found, and I'm not sure if you agree, but that's what I found when I was perusing through this. How many of you were familiar with Sharon Olds before coming here? How many of you are familiar with Denis Johnson's work? How about Paul Auster? And how many of you were like new and like to all of it? Right on, cool. So you guys got open to something new. I hope that you guys investigate their work a little bit more. We do have books in the back that has some of their poetry, so if you want to peruse it, they are for reading here only. They're not lending, so yeah, I'm coming.